everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, we have a very timely and yet enduring topic of relevance, especially with the election coming up. We're talking about patriotism.
Well, in particular, as I'm sure you recall, our last session, we talked about Gene Autry's Cowboy Code. Gene
Yeehaw.
Autry, the famous Western star from the 50s, 40s and 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s,
Yeah.
40s and 50s mainly.
The singing cowboy, the original singing cowboy.
Yes. And in that Cowboy Code, the very last line was, "The cowboy is a patriot." And that started to make me think about, well, how does chivalry and patriotism mesh? Where do they overlap? How do they diverge? As we have found sometimes that isms and chivalry don't always
Yes.
don't always
I think
mix.
they do converge, but as in most things, it depends on your definition of terms. And
Right.
I always say that to have a basis for a discussion, you have to first of all, you have to agree that you'll both abide by an understanding of what constitutes evidence and
Yeah.
factual proven evidence, but you also have to agree on definitions of terms. People tend to use the same word to mean different things and different words to mean the same thing, and that just leads to confusion. So you have to define your terms and understand what you mean by those. And so I think depending on how we define patriotism, I think there is a clear line to the chivalric virtues.
Oh, I see several attachment points,
Yes.
I would say.
Yeah. I think that with other definitions of patriotism, no. So,
Right. Now, before we dive into this too deep,
yes.
the most important question we have to answer, that we have to agree on, is, what are we both drinking?
Yes. I have a glass, my great disappearing glass, and appearing, and now it's gone, and now it's here. A California Sauvignon Blanc.
Oh,
Very nice. It went very nicely with dinner, and I'm continuing with it. And how about you?
I found, just in my touring of bourbon shelves, as I am wont to do, I found something called, and it's got a nice, very nice sort of dark red. It's a bourbon,
Mm-hmm.
not a, well, I actually brought the bottle because I couldn't remember everything that's on it, and it is St. Elmo's Steakhouse.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Straight
Straight
bourbon
bourbon
whiskey
whiskey.
with dark cherry and bourbon vanilla beans.
Wow.
It's not as sweet as you would expect. It's
Yeah.
very rich, made famous in Indianapolis, Indiana. So
Well,
that's
they
really
got
what
that
sold
and
me on
Kurt
it.
Vonnegut. So
Yeah. So yeah, it's 88 proof. So it's
okay.
fairly high octane for a flavored whiskey, but
Well, here's to you.
cheers.
So um I remember growing up during the Vietnam War when there were protests against the war, and some politicians saying, "My country, right or wrong."
Yes.
They were leaving out the last part of the quotation. And so the original quotation is from a U.S. Senator, Carl Schurz, in 1871, he said, "My country, right or wrong, if right, to be kept right, and if wrong, to be set right."
Hmm.
And um, that was commented on by the author G.K. Chesterton, the British author in 1901,
Right.
said, "My country, right or wrong," I'm reading here, "my country, right or wrong, is a thing that no patriot would think of saying except in a desperate case. It's like saying my mother, drunk or sober. No doubt if a decent man's mother took to drink, he would share her troubles to the last, but to talk as if he were would be in a state of gay indifference as to whether his mother took to drink or not is certainly not the language of men who know the great mystery."
Ooh,
Ooh,
and the great
yes,
mystery.
the great mystery.
Capital G, capital M, I'm sure with
Yeah,
GK.
so Chesterton, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's true. And you
yeah,
you you see a
so
lot in, movies, and often it is the sort of the misguided anti-hero, often ends up being the bad guy who, said when the hero calls him out on his behavior or his actions, all these people have died because of you, you're a madman or you're insane. And sometimes the reply is, I'm a patriot. And that and the two are not necessarily distinct from one another.
well, and again, it comes back to your definition of patriotism. And um, Peggy Noonan, who is a conservative and was a speechwriter for Reagan, President Reagan, I think, essentially said that a patriot. Well, I have to explain something else going into this. This is by way of setting up these definitions. There's another term, American exceptionalism, and it the original reference to America being exceptional was made by Alexis de Tocqueville, who
18th century, late 18th century.
yeah, when
Yeah.
he was a Frenchman, he was touring what was then the United States, or about to be, yeah, just very early on, and writing about it and celebrating what he was seeing and saying essentially that America is exceptional because it's a country of people who share common ideals, common values, common principles. Oh, you might say common virtues, chivalric virtues, right? They share those common ideals. It's not a country based on ethnicity or religion or even place of birth. It is
Right.
if you believe in what the principles of the country are, then you can be an American too.
Right.
And he said that was exceptional. Now, that term American exceptionalism, as so many terms do, got perverted into meaning my country, right or wrong, leaving out the last part that it can be
Well,
whatever we can do whatever we want because we're America.
it's tied up in manifest destiny and
Right,
all
right.
that.
So I mention that because um again, back to Peggy Noonan, she said her definition is that patriot is someone who believes in these ideals and that these ideals are for everyone. These ideals of a society can be more than just a little warring tribe. A country can be more than a little warring tribe. It can be welcoming and expansive and nourishing and nurturing to people who share those ideals. It doesn't grow by conquering, it grows by welcoming people. And believing in that ideal is the essence of patriotism, that shared sense of virtue, that expansive idea of what society is.
Yes, and I agree with that, obviously, but there's also I think to call oneself a patriot, I think it's necessary to be willing to defend those ideas as well.
Yes.
defend
Yes.
the ideals, not the
Yes.
country at the expense of your principles, as many patriots, many so-called self-proclaimed patriots have done, defending the sovereignty of a nation while abandoning its principles.
Right. Which is right or wrong, leaving out the setting it right if it's wrong part. And so I wanted to start with that, or lead up to it, because it distinctly contrasts with the opposite end of the spectrum, because patriotism can be perverted into jingoism or chauvinism.
Yes.
Which is the start of that, my essentially right or wrong. That in an extreme form becomes nationalism. And we see that now.
Oh, yeah.
Rampant. People saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with nationalism. I'm a nationalist. I'm a Christian nationalist. I'm a white Christian nationalist. People saying that. I'm not,
Well, they're
obviously, but
claiming that it's just as American, because of our First Amendment of our Constitution, that it's their right to say so. What seems to be getting lost more and more lately is your right to say it doesn't mean you are right in saying it.
exactly. The First Amendment only guarantees that the government will not censor you
Right.
from saying this. It doesn't mean you're free from consequences.
Right.
If you say something stupid, I can call you stupid. That is not, I'm not violating the First Amendment. I'm not a government official. I'm not a government agency, entity, organization, institution. I'm not calling you, I can say, yeah, what you said is wrong, stupid.
Right. Well, and this is and
a perversion of the idea.
Well, but it's the call, the defensive call of about cancel culture is, the fact that you said something and you got canceled, that that whatever happened to my First Amendment? Your First Amendment's absolutely intact, brother.
Yeah.
The government did not come down on you for saying that. Commercial entities who don't want you as a customer, or whose other customers don't want their brands associated with you, have said, if you continue to associate with this bad actor, we will no longer buy your product and you are dumped.
Right.
That's what it is.
And that's not a violation of the First Amendment. Cancel culture is responsibility culture. Really, I don't like the term cancel culture, but because like so many things, it becomes a pejorative term. Essentially, it means, yeah, you're getting the consequences of your actions, the commercial consequences of your actions. And the same people who are saying my First Amendment rights are often saying, and my Second Amendment rights are often saying, yeah, capitalism, free market capitalism. Well, this is capitalism.
That's right.
Happening when companies say, no, I don't want you, Kanye or Ye. And so he's losing business, he's losing contracts. I think it should have happened sooner. I don't think it should have waited for him finally to cross the line into blatant anti-Semitism. I think his anti-blackness for a black man was
he's shown himself to be, and it may be I don't see it myself particularly, but it may be the imbalance inherent in genius. Maybe he can get out that way.
I don't.
But
I also. I mean, that's another topic. Is the trope, which I disagree with, that genius and genius and craziness go hand in hand, or craziness is essential to genius.
I think there's a membrane there.
Yeah, it's another topic. Um,
Yeah.
but so he's bearing the consequences of that. But that's, well, yeah, it's not censorship, it's consequences for
Yeah.
your actions.
Right.
And now nationalism can go even further into fascism. And fascism is when those values, those benefits of belonging to a country because you believe in its ideals, those are restricted to only the true people, the true citizens, the volt,
Well, yeah.
the
And it
the
often
people.
becomes the true people demonstrate their truth, their trueness by being absolutely loyal to an administration or a
Or
regime.
usually a leader.
Right.
Usually the fascism is characterized by several things, including usually a strong leader that people are loyal to. There's also usually racial, ethnic, religious,
Right.
other categories that determine what a true person is, rather than simply, hey, you believe in these values, in the shared virtues, then you're here, you're welcome. No, it's that, no, it's only the true people. I
Well,
mean,
and that and
even
the
Romans, someone could become a Roman, I think, maybe. I don't know enough about ancient Rome.
you could be a citizen of the empire, but
Okay,
you were still
not
but in
okay.
Rome, you were
Yeah,
still there were still Romans and everyone else.
else, right.
Um, but the I was about to say something about the
I
I
apologize
lost
for my knowledge of ancient Rome is lacking,
it.
but
That's I mean, mine is only tertiary, but the there's another aspect of that's what I was going to say that loyalty to the leader or to the regime or whatever is how you demonstrated your trueness. How and if you were loyal, if you were a real patriot, if you wanted to accrue the benefits of the society, you had to conform to these standards. And it was a way of controlling a population, just like a religion, just like um, you know, any authoritarian regime, right?
mhm.
Is here is a set of rules, and our entire society, we are going to force our entire society into this chute of behavior, right? And that will lead, is often said, this will lead us to peace and prosperity. If we're all moving forward in this direction, and we will decide what that direction is, the
Yes,
leadership. So
conformity.
conformity. If you're a patriot, you will conform because by conforming, you make the whole country better.
um
This is a flawed logic that we hear
yes,
often
and um
from the right, from anything that is calling itself the right,
yeah,
the conservative, the right. That is what they are talking about.
well,
Conformity to a
yes,
set of
and
behaviors and
fascism
beliefs.
is inherently a far right ideology. It
Yeah.
is.
But what I find
Now
interesting
they're
in
far
this
left
country,
totalitarian
no,
systems,
not
but
necessarily.
well, communism, it becomes a totalitarian system. It's a totalitarian version of socialism, which is a government controlled version of what's known as democratic socialism, which is, anyway, that's, we're talking now political spectrum rather than patriotism spectrum, but it goes into fascism because fascists use the idea of obedience and conformity as a way of demonstrating patriotism rather than the other end, which is no, your patriotism is demonstrated by setting it right when it's not right. Um,
What I was getting at though was that often you will find the right crying out for their freedom, when in fact what they're doing is giving up freedom in exchange for conformity. And what they're talking about is freedom to conform to their ideals,
yes.
right? Like George Bush said that he doesn't care. What was it about his religious quote about he doesn't
Oh,
care what.
it wasn't Bush. It was someone. It was a senator. If it's the one you're thinking of, when Joe Lieberman was named the first Jewish vice presidential candidate, and the senator
Oh,
said
yeah,
it shouldn't matter what church someone goes to on Sunday,
yeah,
not understanding maybe that Jews celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday.
but still demonstrating that you have to be religious in this
Exactly.
country to hold office,
Yes, which is um which
which
is
is actually spelled
is
out in the Constitution,
that there's can be no religious test
right?
for office. But I have yet to hear of a a, a successful political candidate elected to office who claims to be an agnostic or an atheist. There's certainly um, people like Bernie Sanders, who is what is commonly thought of as a um, non-observant, but a non-observant Jew, in that he doesn't necessarily obey the Sabbath or keep kosher, but he's still Jewish because it's an ethno religion,
Right, right.
it's that's another complicated subject, but um, yeah, there's a American society um, has tended to be very religious, although religious observance, as measured by attendance at a
Right,
at a
right.
place, has been steadily declining. Um,
Yeah, I think the Americans are observant, but not particularly religious. The difference in that
well,
I
it depends
observe.
what you mean by observant means following. It depends on your definition of observant. Um,
Well, I mean by observant, I mean you follow the customs, but don't internalize the tenets.
yeah, which I've always had a bit of an issue with.
Yeah,
um,
because
um,
because veritas.
yes. Well, and my personal motto is words and deeds in accord, so that, because the opposite of that is hypocrisy, so
Yep.
that you what you say and you do should work together, should be aligned. um I know there are people who are popular saying deeds not words, and I understand that they mean by that words without embodiment, without action, without
Without action.
walking the walk.
Hmm.
Talking and talk without walking the walk is meaningless. But you should do both. I think you should
Right.
say it and you should do it, because words have power too.
Right.
Um, but not if you're a hypocrite. Although we see a lot of hypocrites in the public sphere, except you can't shame somebody who's shameless for their hypocrisy. So,
Right. Well, and if they're being defended by an entire cadre of like-minded hypocrites, then
yes. So, Veritas, of course, is you know, the if it's right to keep it right, and if it's wrong to set it right, my country, then that's Veritas. You have to be honest about that, to be able to do that.
well, to determine what's right,
Yes.
what at least adheres to the principles, because that's the
Yes.
other the thing here is that we have to keep going back to what are the principles, and I believe that our at least we're always talking about our country here. We're always talking about America, the United States of America, not a country in the sort of generic term. I mean, we can, but I think the discussion will have less merit. But we're it's my belief, and I think the belief of many, that our Constitution uh, um, tried to lay out those principles.
Yes.
That was the point of the Constitution.
Well, it was not only to lay out the principles, but to provide an institutional structure through which those principles could be embodied.
Yes, exactly. It's a
So,
framework by which all
right,
other legislation should
right.
be compared.
So, for example, justice. There's a Department of Justice that is meant to be independent. Certainly the justice system, the courts are meant to be independent. The Supreme Court is one of the equal third three branches of government. So it's politicizing the Department of Justice and the Supreme Court is
well, to be fair, the Department of Justice was established politically.
Well, yes, and the head of it is a political appointment, but has to be confirmed
by
the Senate.
But the Department of Justice was specifically instituted to investigate the Ku Klux Klan. So, I mean,
well, yes, but I think that certainly whatever the specific mechanisms, and they have evolved over time, the idea of justice is embodied in the Constitution. Right to a fair and speedy trial.
Well, and I
don't
want to
confront your accusers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that it was not rightly instituted, the Department of Justice, because it was a huge situation of injustice over an entire region of the country that they were and instituted because the FBI could not be trusted with the job.
Right.
So it was, I mean,
because J. Edgar Hoover was a racist.
Right. So I'm just pointing out that it was political,
yeah,
but it had its roots in you are right, in justice, in a just outcome.
I think J. Edgar Hoover is an example of another idea that institutions rely on the people in them to work. The people have to believe in the institution, work to make it better, and not work to corrupt it for the benefit of individuals. And
well, that's another, the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover in particular is another good example of being effective by abandoning principles.
Yeah. Well, effective. Okay, can you expand on that?
Well, the FBI under Hoover, the FBI became narrowly aimed at subversives and insurrectionists and anarchists and black people.
Yes.
I mean, they were all lumped together in J. Edgar Hoover's mind.
Yes.
They were socialists and anarchists, and they were out to destroy the country. And it reminds me in some ways of there's an old role-playing game called Paranoia, where if everyone in the game, everyone playing, it was punishable by death to be I'm not going to remember it now. Punishable by death to be a communist, mutant, subversive. I don't remember exactly what it was, but if you were one, you were automatically the other two.
Um,
So so that's how J. Edgar Hoover's mind worked. I believe that if you were one, you must be either you were one of the other, you know, shadowy isms that were working to undermine the country, or you were in cahoots with them.
right. Well, and we see that kind of paranoia, which is contrary to veritas. We see that today when at the extremes, which unfortunately are becoming mainstream, the um, human skin wearing lizard alien pedophile flesh eating
Yeah.
Jews. I mean, it always comes back to the Jews, right? For,
Well, they've got the
but
space lasers after all.
yeah, well,
How are you going to defend your Antarctic stronghold?
they're defensive. The space lasers are defensive. But that was that joke about space lasers. That was because an unnamed
Why does she have to be unnamed?
because I don't want to. Yeah, we can name her Marjorie Taylor Greene. Huh. Don't mention her name 3 times; she might appear. She claimed that forest fires in California were started by Jewish space lasers.
Yeah.
Why the fuck is this woman in Congress?
Oh,
That's
there's
craziness.
there's a half dozen people that 30 years ago, 50 years ago, our parents would have laughed these people out of town.
Exactly.
Whatever their thoughts were, whatever their stance was, these people would have been ridiculed by the previous generation.
And even by people in their own party.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that was before the radicalization of both parties.
Well, I let us not fall prey to the tu quoque fallacy, the whataboutism fallacy, which equates both sides, because the radical right wants fascism. They want to, I mean, the one, a candidate for, I think, governor in Wisconsin said, elect me and Republicans will win every election after this. Not be, I mean, it's, and there are election deniers, the people who say don't believe, despite the court cases and the recounts and the verified recounts of the 2020 election, and despite the fact that some of them won, they don't accept
Right.
that, and some of those are on the ballot, and on the ballot for positions where they would control elections, to be
Yeah.
secretaries of state, to be governors,
Attorneys general.
attorneys general. Radicalization on the left is free tuition for people,
No, no. Okay.
healthcare.
You
You know,
misunderstand what I mean.
okay,
Where there's a, um, yeah, I don't think the policies have been radicalized. The people have been radicalized to abhor anything less than absolute
purity,
purity.
right?
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that. I think
Right.
that if that's how you're defining radicalization, I think that's a problem, where it has to be purity, because purity is conformity. And there can, I mean, the idea of a big tent that could encompass lots of different views,
Right.
but as long as there are shared values, we can disagree about how to achieve those. But when you don't agree on the facts, we can have a difference of opinion, but you can't have your own facts, right? Daniel Patrick Moynihan, longtime senator from New York, I think. If you can agree on what we want to accomplish for the good of people and the good of the country, and disagree about how to achieve that. But when
Well,
your
you can,
vision of the country is it's only for the pure American, real Americans.
right.
I've heard that so much. Not well, who and they're
Well,
defining.
real
Yeah,
Americans, the people that make that claim, real Americans are white Christians.
yes,
That's who real Americans are to them.
yes, that's what they're saying. My my family, both sides of my family, Eastern European Jews from the Baltic region, Latvia, Lithuania, um, and they came to this country because they wanted to flee Europe. My mother's parents wouldn't talk about their experiences here in Europe, and understandably, because they raised two of my mother's cousins whose parents were killed while they hid in a closet. My on my father's side, there was a tradition when young men got to be of an age where they might be drafted into the Tsar's army because the Baltic states were owned by Russia.
Mm-hmm.
They would send them off to the United States, where many of them would enlist and fight for the United States and become citizens. I have a photograph of my great uncle, Dr. Moses Ratting, in his World War One Army military medical corps uniform. My father, my uncles served. It's
I just love that there was a Dr. Moses Ratting. I
yeah.
just that's that's perfect.
Apparently he was something of a well-known painter as well.
No.
Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, but I did see one of his paintings once, and it was pretty good. So, but the they chose to come here, and my family, in some iteration, some forebears have been here for more than 100 years. So and I was born here, my parents were born here. How is that not, we're not real Americans, you know?
Well,
And
let's so your family, your ancestors fled Europe to get what? To get liberty.
life and
Well,
liberty,
right.
right?
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all those things. And
They were
that's what
mostly concerned with life and life.
every, everything else can come after that.
Yes, as
Once we
long
got
as
the
you've got
life,
your health, you know.
so
So yeah,
once we've secured the life, then we can work on the other stuff.
right, exactly, exactly,
So, but what I'm getting to here, patriotism, right? One of the all of these principles, these constitutional amendments and so on, are supposed to be driving us towards greater liberty, right? Easier life, greater liberty, and an easier pursuit of happiness. That's kind of the point.
yes. And again, how do you define liberty? And the meaning of liberty has changed from the 18th century term of liberty to how people are using it now. It did not mean the freedom to do any damn thing you wanted, but it meant, well, what
Well,
did,
liberty, anytime a society uses liberty,
yeah,
it just means that you are not restricted in what you may do within the laws of the society,
right,
right?
exactly,
So because of your ethnicity or because of your
right,
religion or whatever, society, there are always going to be guardrails on society, or else it's not society, it's anarchy.
right,
So anything liberty is the ability to do whatever you like within those hopefully wide guardrails. And the guardrails are only there so that you don't impinge on someone else's liberty
right,
or health or life or property or whatever. So there's this broad range of things we're allowed to do, regardless of, right, equality
right.
under the law, regardless of where you were born, who your parents were, any of those things.
So the people who claim that mask mandates during a pandemic were somehow an infringement were somehow tyranny or an
Right.
infringement of their liberty. No, because your liberty to infect, you don't have the liberty to infect other
Right.
people, and it's also to protect you. But again, veritas, what's truthful, and it comes people not accepting the idea of, oh, infectious diseases that have been known for a long time. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Even the Greeks understood the idea of an infection
yes,
and how it could be spread. But even, but I, you know, we've got people. We can have a whole other discussion about the dumbing down of America. We've touched on it on a couple occasions because it permeates so many of our discussions.
yeah,
There's there's flat earthers out there, for real, like genuine
flat,
people,
yeah.
full grown people who believe the Earth is a disc.
And there's a there's a there's a guy I've seen online who is a scientist, and he just ruthlessly debunks flat earthers. And they said, so you have this model, this model, this model, this model. They are completely incompatible with each other.
Right.
How do you explain this and this and this? You can't. And I was one class I was teaching, I was talking about evidence and fact-based evidence and persuasion and
I'm pouring myself more liquor. This discussion requires another
yes,
shot.
yes, and mentioned to something about um the yes, we went to the moon. Yes, we went to the moon. You don't have to have gone to the moon personally to know and accept and understand the evidence that we went to the moon.
Oh, I think I recall
Oh,
you.
I said, actually, I was talking about dinosaurs. And one student said, oh, her family doesn't believe those existed. They think the Earth is just, not
Hey,
10,000 years old,
yeah.
whatever. And I said, well, she said, yeah, they're crazy, but we didn't go to the moon. And so my response to her was, I can provide you evidence that the moon landing happened. And what's more, the films of the moon landing could not have been made with the technology that existed in 1969.
Right.
If I presented you with that information, would you change your mind? She said, no. I said, okay. And I turned to the rest of the class and I talked about confirmation bias, selective reasoning, and how an evidence-based discussion is not always the most persuasive way to convince somebody to change their mind.
Well, in particular, if someone is not is not educated enough to understand, to encompass the explanation,
Right.
that
So
becomes a problem.
consequently, one of the things I have done in every class I've ever taught is talk about evidence and proof and logic, because I have to. Not because it's not, they don't get that before they get to college.
Right.
Some of them don't get that before they get to grad school. I talk about how do you prove what you're saying? And
Like
part of
trying to tell someone who has no understanding of engineering how an internal combustion engine works.
right,
You've got to understand chemistry, you've got to understand mechanics, you've got to understand electricity.
yeah,
And if you don't understand any of those things, the engine doesn't make sense.
well, any sufficiently advanced
Right.
technology will appear as magic. I was doing a demonstration once, a presentation um, to a high school class about the Middle Ages and chivalry and knighthood and other things and armor and weapons and clothes and stuff. And I found that high school students either think history is cool, history is boring, or history was made up just to give me work to do, or people back then were stupid. And one student said, well, why do you think they were stupid? Well, they didn't have televisions, they didn't have, cell phones, they didn't have the internet. Said, okay, make a television.
Yeah, you're smart. You're
Go ahead,
modern.
make a television. So, well, I don't know how to do that.
Does that mean you're stupid?
I didn't say that. I simply left the question in the air. Said,
Well,
you're not stupid, but the knowledge we have today is built on countless generations of human history. Could you start a fire? If I put you out in the middle of the forest, could you start a fire? Could you build a shelter? Could you find food? Could you find clean water?
right.
Could you dress your wounds? Could you deliver a baby? Could you
Set a bone, build a wall, take
it
orders, give orders.
goes back to Heinlein's
That's
list,
right.
right?
That's
Exactly.
right.
So so we've gotten a bit,
yeah,
as we usually do, far afield. But
back to patriotism.
yes.
So I think we have defined that true patriotism, at least in the context of the United States,
yes,
is support and adherence to the principles set forward in the Constitution.
yes. And
however, our Constitution is designed such that when we have evolved past the use of some of these amendments, we can change them.
Yes,
and alter
it was
them to the new
specifically set up.
society.
It was specifically set up so it could be amended.
Right.
So the originalists are, I have a big disagreement with those who claim originalism, that they are reading the language of the Constitution with the original intent of the founders, of the authors. A lot of times they don't do that. A lot has changed. What you should be original about are the values, the virtues, the ideals, not the specific, necessarily the specifics of 18th century, late 18th century wording,
right,
to derive meaning, but what's behind that, what's the intent of that. And many of the founders wrote extensively about what they intended and what it meant.
Yeah. Right, because you couldn't lay all that out in a single document.
Right. So they amended it with all, what I think of as, okay, there's the Torah, which is like the Constitution. Then there's the Talmud, right? Which is all this commentary on it.
Right.
And that adds to the meaning. And so I think of it that way, but that's, that's how I think of it. So my analogy.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with my familiarity with the Talmud is limited. Very limited.
I can help you. I can help you with that. So,
but we have all of these papers. We have and saying the originalist and looking at defining what it says, defining what the Constitution says by what it says is reductive. All men are created equal. That's just men. Then we're no women, and that's absurd on the face of it. That women should not. As our modern viewpoint is that women should not enjoy the benefits of liberty as well as men.
Yes, all people, but they didn't say all people are created equal. Only men could vote. Only land-owning men could vote. Only white land-owning men could vote. Women couldn't vote. Black people were, for the purposes of a census, considered 2/3 of a person. That was
that's much later. They were in the 18th century. They were considered subhuman.
Right. well, for purposes of the census, for counting, for apportionment of resources.
After they
But
were freed.
yeah, so um, so patriotism, blind patriotism, is
Is like
dishonest.
any other kind of fanaticism.
Yes, it's not recognizing the how the country has the things the United States has done wrong, and the things that the United States has done to correct the things it did wrong. And it's still a work in progress. That more perfect union that's
Mm-hmm.
that's mentioned in the Declaration, we're still working on that. It's still a work in progress, and will continue to be.
Yeah.
Um, so the the idea of, yeah, patriotism, a shared belief in the principles outlined in the Constitution, which I think in a lot of ways correspond with the virtues.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what our ultimate thesis here is patriotism when pursued the right way is virtuous.
Yes.
However, it is patriotism is used wrongly to limit the the possibilities of a society.
Um, well, to limit other people's
Well, that's what I'm.
access.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I mean. I mean by saying that some people are not deserving of the benefits of that society means that any benefit they might bring to the society is lost.
Yes. Um, what was the quotation about the the last refuge of a scoundrel? Am I thinking of something else?
I don't think it's. I don't think it's patriotism.
The last refuge of a scoundrel. Yeah.
It is
Um,
patriotism.
Samuel Johnson, in 1774, Samuel Johnson printed The Patriot, a critique of what he viewed as false patriotism. He made a famous statement: patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. The line was not, as is widely believed, about patriotism in general, but rather what Samuel Johnson saw as the false use of the term patriotism by William Pitt, the Patriot
Mm.
minister, and his supporters. Johnson opposed self-professed patriots in general, but valued what he considered true self-professed patriotism. So,
Well, I mean, patriotism could be viewed from that angle, like like one of the sins of proclaiming your piety and how
yes,
often you pray.
yes. So he was criticizing the people who proclaimed themselves to be a patriot but didn't act in true patriotism,
Right.
and as opposed to the people who were true patriots. And so yeah, I knew that quotation was there somewhere, but it's a criticism of um, false patriotism as he saw it, and a specific example of false patriotism. And we are the political landscape is littered, abundant with scoundrels of that sort these days.
Yeah, and you can. I mean, politics has been rife with scoundrels and hypocrites since
Yes,
the beginning of time. Since
yes,
the idea of politics.
yeah. Um, so I think it's I always vote in
Yep.
elections.
I think we're
Um,
seeing in the midterms this cycle much more activity than in the
yes.
decades.
Well, and I think that people are always concerned about economic issues.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have a democracy, the economy won't matter much. You can't have economic benefits will be very restricted if we no longer have a functioning democracy. And for
Right.
people who don't recognize it, that our democracy, our country, is very much on the ballot this year. As I mentioned, a lot of election deniers, a lot of people who say if they lose, they won't accept the results, but they won't accept the results only if they lose. And that is not patriotic at
Right.
all. So we have, we've talked about prowess and humility. If you lose, you must have the humility to be honest and say you lost. And a
Yep.
violation of that is hubris and dishonest. And our
And pride
democracy is
and
pride and throw in every other kind of vice you can imagine. Our democracy is very much on the ballot.
well, I think we are waking up to the fact that not judicial necessarily, but the judiciary is also on the ballot.
Yes.
It's been proven that the judiciary, I mean, I kind of have to give credit to the Republican Party. They tripped to it earlier that if they could control, since judicial appointments are made politically,
Yes. And some of them are lifetime appointments.
yes, they could uproot one of the guardrails.
Yes. And they have been pretty successful in doing that.
They tripped to it quicker than the Democrats did.
Yes. Yeah.
The Democrats, I think, spent too long thinking that it was a level playing field, that everybody was playing by the same rules, and it just turned out not to be the case.
Yeah.
And it only kind of really became obvious during Obama's administration,
Yeah.
I think.
Well,
McConnell's
yeah.
recalcitrance and the appointment of judges and all
Yes.
that.
Well,
But let's
and the false claims about his not being a citizen and false
yeah.
claims. It's so many false, racist, dumbass motherfuckers perverting the system in what is absolutely unpatriotic. It pisses me off.
But I think agreed. I agree. But I think the whole birther thing it got a lot of traction, but I think that the actual believers in that are a pretty small fraction.
But it was it was the starting point for a
Oh,
number of things. That's
well,
how.
it certainly pointed out that, or made it clear that, well, there certainly weren't a lot of people, a lot of Republicans saying that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
There should have been more.
John McCain did.
Yes.
John McCain
Yes.
pointed out it was ridiculous. Good for him.
Right. Right. I mean, there were a few, right? There
Yeah.
are a few honest. There's got to be some honest and moderate Republicans out
Except
there.
they are being booted out of the
Yes, they
party.
are.
They
Yes, they
are.
are.
They aren't running for reelection, or they were primaried and are not running.
Yep.
And meanwhile, the ones who voted to not accept the results of the election in Congress, not certify the results of the election, after the Capitol was invaded, after the assault on the Capitol, they still voted not to accept the results. They're still serving in Congress.
Yep.
They were aiding and abetting an insurrection, it
Yeah.
seemed,
They
from
were at
watching it.
least they were at least apologists for it.
Yes.
At least. the very best thing you could say about them is that they were apologists for it.
Yeah. So,
Not patriotic.
exactly. So my quoting Samuel Johnson about scoundrels, they're all over the place.
Well, but and this is
They're flying off to Cancun. Meanwhile, their
their
fellow
state is
citizens that they represent in Texas are freezing because of the power failure, and they're flying off to Cancun.
this is to me
For
the
example,
yeah, and it's points up to me the perversion of patriotism, because the idea, these people that we're talking about, those people who stormed the Capitol, right,
yeah,
had believed they'd been trapped in an echo chamber long enough to believe that they were trying to save democracy.
right,
This is, I mean, the several hundred people that were actually willing to take up a club or whatever they could lay their hands on. Many were actually armed, and if a shot
yes,
had gone off, we would have a lot different conversation right now.
yes,
But if any of those people who were moving on the Capitol had drawn an actual firearm, there would have been a slaughter. And that's the only thing that saved him, is that nobody, not one person, pulled a gun.
right,
But my point is that they believed they were acting in the best interests of the country. Now, what those best interests are is up for debate, and then we can talk about white nationalism as a separate thing.
right,
But they had been convinced that the only way they were going to save democracy was by taking armed action against what they saw was an illegitimate government.
yes. So it comes back to evidence, and
Right.
it comes back to proof, and it comes back to honesty,
But they were
because the
but the
people
problem is that they were not
they may have honestly believed it, but the people presenting them with false information knew damn well that that wasn't true. But they were
you're
presenting
absolutely
them with
correct.
false information, in the case of certain, like Fox News, for profit.
Yes.
And they've been doing that for a long time. And in the case of some politicians, for power, to remain in office. And they were using the honest love of country of these people and perverting it to
Yeah.
an evil cause.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. That's what I
Yeah,
was getting at. Is
yeah.
that perversion, just the same word I used, but that the idea that they were not exposed enough to the truth.
I think the yes, I agree. They were not exposed enough to the truth. However, it's out there.
Yeah, it's a willful ignorance.
It's a
I'll give you at a certain
willful
point.
ignorance. Yes. Now, George Orwell wrote 1984, and Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World.
Yep.
And in 1984, Orwell describes a then future society in which information is controlled and you're only getting the official line. And there's newspeak, which we've actually seen, the Clean Skies Act that allowed more pollution and so on. Huxley, also writing about a dystopian future society, said, no, the information, the truth will be out there, but it will be lost in a sea of irrelevancies.
Right. And he also said that people will embrace their prison.
Yes. And I think we have, in some ways, a combination, because we have disinformation, willful disinformation, not simply misinformation, mistaken information, but intentionally incorrect information being fed to people to keep them angry, to keep them watching, to keep the sponsors happy, to keep the profits rolling in. Because the more outraged people are, the more engaged they are. So you make them angry, they'll tune in more.
Now,
And
so this is all correct and something we've touched on over and over again. And maybe there's another recording session about the virtues and media.
I think there is. I think there is.
So before we do that all here,
yes,
we've taken up enough of these people's time.
yes,
Maybe we
I
should
think we
let them
have.
go.
And before I drop another F-bomb, which I'm absolutely willing to do, maybe we should say this has been our discussion about patriotism. So we encourage people to vote as if the future of democracy depended on it, because it fucking does.
Yeah,
It was my second F-bomb of the night. So,
that's all right. It was judiciously applied.
well,
And that was the key, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I say, get the motherfucking liars out.
yes.
That's
There we go. Can we? Can we fist bump? I don't.
and this way?
This way, that way, there.
Oh, my microphone.
Yeah.
If I go up here.
There we go.
All
Okay.
right. That is an amazing piece of communication,
Yeah.
people, right there. You don't even realize.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And please like, share, subscribe, send us your comments and your ideas for topics.
Yes, please.
And until we
And
see
recommendations
you.
for drinks.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Actually, I think I may have a few. I just got a new bottle of spirits from a new maker that they gifted me and asked me to try, review, and experiment with. So I will be doing that.
Wait a minute. How'd you get a sponsor and I didn't get a sponsor? What?
Well, I know people. Hey,
Ah.
so yeah.
You're holding
So
out on me.
I'll let you try it sometime. So
all right.
So until then, until we see you again, be thou
a good night
and true.